So when Camus is invoking this notion of collective destiny, he's also trying to get us to see the ways in which focusing on individual destiny allows social injustice to endure. If we're just focused on ourselves and we're not attentive to the great patterns in society, then we can be a winner and a whole lot of others can be losers that we just never see. I'm just never aware of it. So I'm going to shift us just a little bit, just slightly later passage in the section for this, the reading for this week, to a place where Camus invokes the notion of the hero. And in our conversations in the discussion sessions on Thursday, and actually the week before, we've talked a bit about this idea of the heroic. What does it mean? What does the heroic mean? And what does Camus mean when he's being, in some ways, kind of critical of being a hero? From a Jungian standpoint, this is something we discussed in the Zoom sessions. From a Jungian standpoint, the posture of the hero, myths and stories of the hero, have to do with ego development. They have to do with what it requires for us to become functioning in the world. But in order to make room for the unconscious, or in order to make room for that which is outside of our conscious awareness or outside of the ego's sort of comfort zone or control, that idea of the hero has to fall. And Jung suggested and I think we suggested this in the very first lecture, that we often experience these advances of the unconscious as defeats, as expressions of failure, and perhaps even as encounters with death and with our mortality. Camus' understanding of the hero, though, might be a little bit more closely tied to as we say, to this idea that the individual destiny needs to be released into this greater or more important or more essential experience of collective destiny. So then we have this passage. Let me read this passage to you from Camus. This is page 179 in my version of the book. This is obviously Ryu speaking. He says, "The narrator is well aware how regrettable is his inability to record at this point something of a really spectacular order, some heroic feat or memorable deed like those that thrill us in the chronicles of the past. The truth is that nothing is less sensational than pestilence, and by reason of their very duration, great misfortunes are monotonous." So we might think here about the distinction between the spectacle, which draws our attention to something other than life as we lead it. So it's taking our attention elsewhere to something that is heightened, something that is dazzling, something that is manufactured to capture our attention. So the distinction between the spectacle and an awareness of attention itself. Typically when a spectacle captures us, our attention is drawn to it in a way in which we're not aware. And I want to elaborate on this just briefly, but gives just a little bit more to chew on. This is from a French philosopher named Guy Debord. He's a political philosopher, I believe. And I'm just going to read this quotation to you, and I'll tell you where I sourced it from in a little bit. 2 sentences. Guy Debord, written about 50 years ago. "The whole life of those societies in which modern conditions of production prevail presents itself as an immense accumulation of spectacles. All that once was directly lived has become mere representation." All that once was directly lived has become mere representation. Very first thing that comes to mind when I hear that is a friend of mine, this goes back 15 years, my wife and I were walking with him and his partner through the redwoods in California, and he was hectoring his partner a little bit about, he's like, okay, now, remember his partner had his camera out. They were both out taking a lot of pictures. What we're seeing is, remember, you have to actually have the experience that you're documenting. And in this age, when we're constantly taking selfies, you show up at the Grand Canyon, what do you have to do? Take a selfie. Trying to capture some experience from in which the frame is excluding maybe lots of other things that happened, sort of focusing us down to a very narrow, thin plane. How much do we lose? And how much of our life is determined by that need to produce image, need to create spectacle, need to draw others' attention toward us. This, actually, the quote, I should say, came from an op-ed that Robert Zaretsky wrote. Rob Zaretsky is a professor at the University of Houston in the Honors College. The op-ed appeared in 2017 after the inauguration of Donald Trump I don't know if I said this, in the New York Times. And, Donald Trump, one can very safely say his presidency has been spectacular, very much of spectacle, and his rise into the Oval Office has been marked by his ability to manufacture and direct attention to very specific things that keep our eyes off of life as it is lived. Back to Camus, as we sort of wrap up this section. So, another quote from Camus, this is a few pages later. Without memories, without hope, they lived for the moment only. Indeed, the here and now had come to mean everything to them. For there is no denying that the plague had gradually killed off in all of us the faculty not of love only, but even of friendship. Naturally enough, since love asks something of the future, and nothing was left us but a series of present moments. It's page 182. I'm going to read that last sentence again. Naturally enough, it has killed off the faculty not only of love, but even of friendship. Naturally enough, since love asks something of the future, and nothing was left us but a series of present moments. So some last thoughts with this passage as we wrap up this section. So Camus suggests to us here that what the people in Oran had was a series of present moments. And he says that in 1946, 1947, it's maybe hits one differently than it hits us here in the 21st century, when we spend a lot of time talking about mindfulness and the virtue of being present, or the real value of coming into the present moment and keeping from escaping to the future or the past. Back then, I expect it was a bit more of a radical thought. But Camus, in this moment, as he's framing this for this, it sounds like defeat. It sounds like a coming to presence that is just about exhaustion. Because if we weren't exhausted, we would be thinking about the future, a future reunion, or we would be thinking about the past when things were blissful and wonderful. So I guess my question here is, what happens when we no longer relate to a nostalgic past or some sort of imagined future triumph, which we might use the word hope there, some future in which things are better than they are now. When we stop relating to the past in that way and stop relating to the future in that way, what happens? And is there a path that's different for us than what Camus lays out here, which is one of a kind of exhaustion? Is there a way in which coming into the present moment actually opens up possibility and opens up a vital way of being human that hasn't been present to us because of this divide in our attention? So I'm going to close this section with those questions.